Hi, and welcome to this conversation about good grief. My name is Matthew Anderson. I'm the European culture editor of the New York Times, and I'm thrilled to be joined by the play's two performers, Sian Clifford and Nikesh Patel. Normally, we do something like this as a question and answer session in the theatre after the production was finished, but of course, that's not possible at the moment because of the pandemic. But the pandemic has also meant that this show has developed in a particular way, and it's a new type of production. It's theatre, but it's also perhaps a bit like film or a bit like television. But it also means that this can go around the world and people can see it not just in a theatre in London, but anywhere. So, as I said, it's a new type of production that we've seen tonight, and it's come out of the circumstances in which you've made it. It's theatre, but it's also recorded, and it uses some of the techniques of film and television to put it together. When you're asked about what is this project that you're working on, how do you describe it to other people, Sian?
Well, I've been coining this word plilm, which has been making some people very angry because it's
Oh.
such a horrible word. But I did intend it as a joke, I can assure you. Yeah, it really is. It's a genuine hybrid. It's neither one nor the other, but I think celebrates both forms. So, we're still demanding that our audience suspend their disbelief. We don't have a full set. It's not a short film. But you get to have the intimacy of film. You get to see close-ups that you'd never get to see if you were in the theatre. Even if you're in the front row, you wouldn't get to see that kind of those emotional shifts. And so I think it sort of captures both. It celebrates both. They're both very dear to my heart and Nikesh's too. And it's just lovely to be able to do something whilst our theatres are closed that is still engaging with theatre audiences in this way.
As actors, I'm sure usually you have different techniques that you use when you're working in those different forms. It's a very different way of expressing yourself to communicate to a huge auditorium than it is to a camera. So when you're doing something that involves elements of both, how do you prepare for that, Nikesh?
The rehearsal process felt in a lot of ways like working on a play. Just the time that you don't usually get when you're on a set. It's very quick. You're sort of you're required, I think, with a lot of film and television to come with a lot of decisions made and then kind of work things out quite quickly. Whereas on this, I think it's one of the great things about doing theatre is you really get to take time to figure out the intention behind a scene, a line, the whole piece. But yeah, technically, I did feel like it drew on both skill sets, because being able to sustain long scenes, I think that was one thing. We were shooting scenes that aren't uninterrupted in a way that on a set you go, right, we'll cut here, we'll chop this up, we'll shoot this, we'll cover this in a different way. But as Sian said, there's something about the intimacy that the camera allows, which requires, there was definitely some calibrating. There was definitely, that's where trust in our director came in handy, just to make sure that we're pitching it for the right audience and not trying to shout to the gods.
I'm interested to hear you talk about thinking about yourself as an actor in space as you would in the theatre, but I understand the rehearsal process for the production involved, like we are now, and like we're getting used to doing a lot of things, working on Zoom. And so I wonder how you approach that. How do you think about yourself in space when really you're or think about yourself on a stage when really you're in your living room or your dining room, Sian?
Yeah, I mean, that was a negotiation that sort of unfolded during rehearsals because it was totally new to all of us. I've done some, read-throughs on Zoom during the past year, but nothing as sort of physical as this, or that needed us to ultimately physicalize it and at some point be together in a space. So Nikesh and I did a lot of rearranging of our furniture to try and create a map so that we were in the same room even though we were in different rooms. And so we did a lot of that, and then we would put our computers in certain spaces so that it would be as if we were looking at each other in the room. And then we would also make sure that we were the only one that each other could see. So our director and our writer, they would get rid of their videos, and Nikesh and I would hide ourselves. So it was almost like we were talking to each other. And that obviously came later. We built towards that. And then we had one day together at my flat where we completely like dismantled things and moved it around as a rehearsal, because we only had 2 days to film the whole thing.
They must have been incredibly exhausting days. Nikesh?
Yes, they were. I think well, one of the things I think we're all learning is how to create and make stuff in this way. There was a moment of kind of going, oh right, this is it. We've got 2 days, and we've got to serve all the work that we've been doing in rehearsal. And I think that's where, you sort of grab your partner by the elbows, look each other in the eyes and go, you ready? Let's go.
If it were a classic theatre work in the theatre, you describe it as a two-hander. It's got a cast of two. But of course, there is a third character who's like maybe even the main character of the production, and that's Liv, the character that you're both mourning. How do you go about creating the sense of that character when there's no one? I mean, we hear her voice at one stage, but by that stage, we've already got a very firm idea of who she is. How did you guys go about creating that sense of her for us, your audience?
We discussed it really early on, didn't we? I think it was like one of the first things we sort of talked about, that if there was someone in our lives that felt that electrifying
and alive.
Yeah, that alive. And we both did. We both thought of someone immediately. It's not the same person, but we both knew who the other person was and what they meant to that person. So that was really vivid for us. I mean, certainly for me, I never find it particularly helpful to then picture that as the person. It's more, I think we needed to find a common ground on the qualities of that human being and what that meant to us. And so as soon as we sort of isolated those things and shared those experiences with each other, and Nikesh and I are friends, so we knew about these people anyway, and how much they meant to us. So it was, for me, that came into such clear focus very quickly, who she was.
I had a sense definitely of both of your characters on sort of a journey through grief and grief as a journey. And I was thinking of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her stages of grief. But I had a sense that you were both maybe moving through them at different times. So it wasn't just one sort of arc that everything moved through. Did you talk about that, about where each of you was in that process of grieving and how they related to each other? Sian?
Well, we certainly talked about, the 5 stages of grief, and that was sort of what Lorien structured the play around. But what I think she does so brilliantly is capture that is not a linear experience, and it's not that what I love about Adam and Kat and the conflict they experience is that they're on different moments of those stages at different times, and then they come back and they clash on different things. And I think that is the truth of the messiness of grief.
What about the title? It's Good Grief, it's called. So it's usually sort of like exclamation that you make, and the idea of good grief kind of seems quite paradoxical, really. We usually think it's one of the most terrible things that can happen to you, that you can have to grieve. Why is it called Good Grief, Nikesh?
I think maybe we think it's paradoxical in the West, where the culture and the attitude towards grief and mourning,
And death and dying.
yeah, is repression and cover up and brave face and soldier on. And I think there are cultures where, at a funeral you sing or you wail, or and you we talk about theatre as catharsis, right? You let something out so that by the end of the experience, the audience collectively has experienced something. And I think it feels, I know there are people who will have experienced grief during this period of that we're in now with the pandemic and with lockdown. But I think even before that, there is something about the conversations that we're having around mental health and not shying away from stuff that we normally term negative or bad. And so I think it feels like a really healthy way to talk about emotion.
You talk about grief differing between cultures, but it also strikes me that men and women grieve differently as well. How do you think that plays out in the? I mean, I think that they're definitely not sort of like archetypes in which Nikesh, your character grieves like a typical bloke, and Sian, you grieve like a woman. But there is definitely a sense that each character is reacting to certain expectations or different ways of being because of their gender. How did you talk about that when you were, or think about that when you're putting the play together?
The conversation was less about gendered roles in that respect, but certainly there was constantly plotting the level of cover up that each character was going through, and that cover up, some of that might be your sense of self as a man or a woman, but I think there's a societal thing again, that what's expected of you at certain times. So I think both these.
What it was, I think there's definitely, and it comes out in the argument during the IKEA scene, that Kat has been taking an enormous amount of responsibility for Adam's well-being. So in terms of being the primary caregiver, that's something that I haven't consciously acknowledged until now. This is why I love talking to people outside of it, because you get lost in the world of the play.
Sian, this is the second thing we've seen you in recently, which is about grief. Fleabag is really a story all about grief and about a missing friend. What keeps drawing you to these stories?
Well, it actually wasn't until I had an interview the other day that I was like, well, Fleabag's about grief. So I don't know that it's grief specifically, but it is just complicated human women that when I read a script that feel very real and embodied to me, that's what excites me. And certainly when I read this script, I was completely blown away by it and thought it was so beautifully written and so clear. And I loved Kat. I felt like I hadn't played anyone like her before.
And Nikesh, what drew you in?
Yeah, I think the messiness of it. I think the acknowledgement that human beings are many things, often at the same time, and I think also the timing can't be ignored. To get this script while we're all starved of contact and connection, and yes, it's about grief, but there's a real celebration in there as well, and I think a celebration of the fact that sometimes things hurt. Sometimes things that are not to sound trite, but sometimes things that are really worth it are gonna cause you pain, and it's about not shying away from that. So I think it was all of that. And obviously working with Sian, that was a big draw as well.
Stop
Well,
it.
well, it's a fantastic production. It's streaming on originaltheatre.com until April 15th. If you haven't seen it already, definitely check it out. And if you have, tell your friends about it, because it is a real original, and it's a real response to what's happening now in a really creative way. I think congratulations to you both on wonderful performances, and thanks for this conversation this evening.
Thank you. It's lovely chatting to you.